All right. So it's um, tonight wanted to finish up our look at textual observations and then go to the next step. We've been spending time on the textual observation of the poem, focusing our attention on a few elements. After doing the diagram, want to come back and, as I mentioned last week, we're looking at the text from different points of view, right? Have that stone. I don't have it with me today, but just to rotate the passage, we're looking at it from different perspectives, looking for specific things. And so in the textual observation step, we're now looking at the passage for particular grammatic details and the things to look for when we're doing poetry, is we want to examine the verbs. And so we did that. We looked at the three main characteristics of the verb, which, if you'll remember, is the mood, the voice, and the tense. And then we did an example of that from Psalm 99 and went through each verse and just identified the verbs and these characteristics. And those are the verbs are an important feature within the text because they usually drive the action of the passage. And we want to be able to understand, is the author, is he speaking of something that's already happened, that's going to happen, that's happening at that moment? And what is his attitude towards what is happening? Is it a command that he's giving? Is he just making a statement? Does he have a question? Is there some uncertainty? Um, and so by looking at the mood, we can determine uh, the those aspects, and that's again helpful. There's a big difference between a command and a question. There's a difference between having uncertainty or certainty in what you're saying or what the author's saying. And so we looked at the verbs and spent quite a bit of time doing that because that's such an important part of observing. Then we talked about pronouns, identifying the person and the number and what the pronoun refers to, and that's going to be, we're going to look again at Psalm 99 as an example and do that. The conjunctions, we discussed identifying the kind of conjunction and what it's connecting. Then looking for conditional clauses, and then purpose or result statements. All right. So we're going to, like I said, go through Psalm 99 and do the rest of these. And so with that, I'm going to have us read the Psalm just to keep us familiar with it, and then have you guys help with identifying these key textual observations. So I'm going to ask if Fu Wei, if you could read verses 1 through 3, and then Shulong, if you could read verses 4 and 5, and then Brother Daniel, if you could read 6 through 9. All right. So Fu Wei, if you could start us off. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. All right. Okay, verse 1 to verse 3. The Lord begins, let the people trembles. He's enthroned above the circumference, let the earth shake. The Lord is great in Zion, and he exalted above all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he.
The strength of okay. The strength of the king loves justice. You have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Exalt the Lord our God and worship as his footstool. Holy is he.
Brother Daniel, can't hear you. You're still muted. Yeah,
Because I
there we
can't
go.
Yeah, but I can't see the text because I'm using the mobile. Of course,
Okay.
I'll switch screen. Yeah, so maybe you get somebody else to read. Yeah,
Okay, no problem. Pastor Philip, would you
sorry.
mind reading verses 6 to 9? Good evening.
Sure. Good evening. Yes. Moses and Aaron were among his priests, and Samuel was among those who called on his name. They called upon the Lord, and he answered them. He spoke to them in the pillar of cloud. They kept his testimonies and the statute that he gave them. O Lord our God, you answered them. You were a forgiving God to them, and yet an avenger of their evil deeds. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his holy hill, for holy is the Lord our God.
All right, very good. So let's do this. I've got the text on the right. Now we're just going to, again, we already looked at the characteristics of the verb. So now we're going to look at the pronouns in the passage. And again, just by way of a quick review, remember when we talk about pronouns, a pronoun is a noun that is referring to, representing, or is in the place of another noun. So we have the first person pronouns, I, me, and my is the singular, and plural is we, us, our. And then we have second person, you or your, and in English, you can't tell the difference between single or plural. And then there's the third person, which he, she, him, her, the singular, or they, them, their, the plural. So what we want to do is identify what pronouns we see and identify the first, second, or third person, and then the antecedent. That means what is the noun that this pronoun is pointing to? All right. And again, that's important to be able to make sure we are tracking correctly what these pronouns are doing. Because sometimes when you see that, pronoun is it who is that referring to? So it's important that we're specific and understand that. Because, for example, I'll just in verse 1, right? The Lord reigns, let the peoples tremble. He is enthroned above the cherubim, let the earth shake. Well, who does the he refer to? Right? We want to make sure we are accurate and correct. And here the obvious thing is it's referring to the Lord. That's the nearest antecedent, if you will, that is referring to that the Lord is enthroned. So rather than repeating, saying the Lord reigns, the Lord is enthroned, he just used the pronoun he to refer to him. All right, that gives some variety as well, so it's not redundant. So with that, let's just go verse by verse. I already did. I'll do the first one here. So he, that's a third person singular, right? Pronoun, and it's referring to the Lord. Okay. So let's just keep going with that. In fact, I will just do the first 3 verses because there's only, well, sorry, that's not true. There are a couple others. So I'm going to let Fu Wei, since you read this, go ahead and look at verse 2 and 3 and see if you can identify the pronouns and then who they refer to.
Okay, for verse 2, the word he is exalted. The he is the pronouns.
Yes. And
Okay, so yes, third person singular
yeah.
refer to the Lord.
Yep. Same as verse 1. Okay.
And the verse 3, the them that let them praise them, the word is the pronouns here. Is a second person plural.
Okay. It is plural, but it's actually third person.
Third person.
Yeah. It's third person plural.
All right.
Okay. Because it's more than one. he or she would be singular. Them, they is plural, and then it's third person. So it's when you think about like first person, me, the speaker would be the first person. So I, me, our. Second person would be you. So you, your. Third person, now we're talking about somebody else outside of the conversation. So that's why they're the third person. So first and second person are in the conversation, the speaker and the one he's speaking to. The third person is speaking about others. That's why it's he or she or they or them. So just as a point to remember. Okay, so them would be third person plural, and then who does that refer to?
It refer to the people who is trembling in verse
Yes,
1.
very good. Because here I'll let's do it this way. I'll use another color. Yeah, you go to the nearest possibility. So let them. So okay, let's go back. Well, who's the last group of people or last person mentioned was the peoples. All right, so that would be, and it's mentioned twice there in verses 1 and 2. So that's the reference. Okay, great. Any other pronouns in verse?
Okay. The next one is your. Praise
Yes.
your great. The pronoun is yours.
All right. It's
The
your.
second person singular.
Yeah, and we know it's singular because of who it refers to, right? Who is it referring to?
Referring to the Lord.
Yeah. Now, here is where I want to draw attention to why do we care about pronoun? This seems like just an academic exercise. What's the value? Well, notice here a change in the pronoun. It refers to the Lord, but notice verses 1 and 2, the pronoun is he, third person. But in verse 3, now it's personalized. It's your. So verses 1 and 2, he's making a general statement, a general declaration. The Lord reigns. He is enthroned. So he's speaking to, right, the peoples, right, the world. But then in verse 3, it's made personal when he says, now let them praise your name, God. So he's speaking to God at this point. So there's a shift, there's a change. You want to take note of that. Why does he do that? What's the significance of that? Is there significance? So there's another also too, another example would be like in some text where the author refers to himself even in the third person. Let me see if I can give you an example. But there are several Psalms where, oh, that's not what I wanted, where it's helpful to follow the pronouns because it'll help us. Is he speaking to himself, to someone else, another group of people? But if we go to Zechariah, it's kind of an interesting, oh boy, trying to remember. It's 7. Yeah. Notice here, the word of the Lord came to Zechariah on the 4th day, the 9th month, and town of Bethel sent some leaders to entreat the Lord, speaking to the priests. And then notice verse 4, the word of the Lord of hosts came to me. And then a little bit later, it says the word of the Lord came to Zechariah. Then the word of the Lord of hosts came, let's see, saying, this isn't the text I'm remembering, but at least we saw one example. So he mentions Zechariah as if he was in the third person. Like it'd be like me saying, okay, Tim is starting to teach the class now. Now, if I'm saying that, but I'm using my name instead of saying I am about to teach the class, that's a little different. It's a little strange. Even look at the Pentateuch. There are several examples where Moses is referred to in the third person. Yet it's Moses who wrote the Pentateuch. But so that's something to keep in mind. Again, sometimes that's just a style thing. Other times the author may intentionally not want to draw attention to himself. So he mentioned himself in the third person. The prophets often did that. And so it's just important to consider what pronouns being used and why that pronoun's being used. And especially, like I said, when we saw in the Psalm here, where he goes from the third person to the second person. So he's going from statements about God in general to the people, and then to speaking to God directly. There's another example. I don't remember if I shared it with you from Psalm 73. I think I did last week, right? Where the first part of the Psalm, the pronouns were I and they, referring to the wicked. And he's saying I, and he's talking about himself and how he was envious of the wicked and looking at them. But then in the second part of the Psalm, the pronouns shift to himself, but you, to God. And so we can see a change as he's focused on himself and on others, he was having the problem. Discontentment, jealousy, envy. But when he changed his focus to God, then when the pronoun shifted from they and them, the people, to God and you and he, that's where there was a change in his attitude. And so you could track that, you can see that in the pronouns. Psalm 51, another example where the pronouns there are first person and second person. David, it's a prayer of David to the Lord regarding his sin. And it's important, if you look at the Psalm, and we did this quite a while back, but there's a particular principle here that's important to see. Notice he says, be gracious to me. Let's see if I can. How do I do that? Be gracious to me, O God, according to your loving kindness, according to the abundance of your compassion, blot out my transgressions, wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, cleanse me from my sin. I know my transgressions. If you go all the way through the Psalm, my sin before me, I have sinned against you, your sight, you. I was brought forth in sin. Sin, my mother conceived me. All the way through, we see by David focusing, repeating, emphasizing this first person singular pronouns, we see here a principle of repentance being expressed. And that principle is this: taking ownership, taking responsibility for your own sin. And the repeated use of the first person pronouns really shows David is recognizing, accepting, taking responsibility for his sin. And it conveys this is a personal prayer between him and the Lord. He wasn't making some general teaching about confession and repentance. This was his personal response after he recognized his sin, that he took ownership of that sin. He didn't blame someone else. And just that repetition of the first person pronoun shows that emphasis. So just some examples to help us see the significance, the importance of looking at these pronouns, paying attention to them. Okay, so that was a little bit of a detour, but holy is he. So again, we see he there in verse 3 as well. Okay, verses 4 and 5. I think I had Shulong reading that. So I'm going to ask you, Shulong, to do the pronouns for us. Verse 4 and then verse 5.
Okay, verse 4, you have. Then verse 4, you, okay, have. So you is second person, singular. Refer to the king.
The king, yeah. And again, this would be the speaking to the Lord, right?
Yep.
From verse 1 as well. Okay, good. Any
And
others?
again, the second one, the repeat that the you
Yep.
also has the same case.
All right, good. So that's exactly the same. So we don't need to repeat it here. We've already noted that. All right, good. Any others that you see here in verses 4 or 5?
Verse 5, verse 4, yeah, this is all for verse 4, then verse 5, exalted the Lord our God, our first person, plural.
Good.
Then refer to people, but I would say Jacobites. Jacobites.
Yeah,
Israel.
people
Yeah.
and himself, right? Because he
Yeah.
says our.
Our and worship at his. Yeah, his. His is third person singular.
Good.
Refers to God, the Lord. And finally is holy is he third person singular also refers to the Lord.
Great. Now again, notice, so verse 4, personalized, right? He's speaking directly to the Lord. You have established, you have executed. But then verse 5, he goes back and now he's giving a general instruction, an imperative, a command to the people, specifically, as Shulong noted, people of God, exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool. So yeah, I think maybe even just the Israelites or Jacobites, as you said. But notice, and worship at his third person. Holy is he. So he's now giving a general statement, command to the peoples. All right, great. Pastor Philip, verses 6 to 9.
Yes. Verse 6, pronoun. The first line, pronoun is his priest. His is third person singular. It refers to the Lord.
Yep.
And
we see it again there.
Yeah,
Verse
his,
6,
I
same
think,
thing.
same case. And on the third line, another pronoun is they. They refers to the people of Jacob or the people of Israel.
And what's the person and number? What person?
Oh, third person plural. Yeah, they.
Yes.
Third person plural. So, and the second pronoun on the third line is he. he is third person singular, and it refers to the Lord.
Okay, good. Very good.
Mhm.
Verse 7.
Verse 7, the pronoun he is third person singular
Yep, we have the same.
and refers to the Lord. He spoke to them. Them is third person plural and refers to Israelites.
Okay, good.
And on second line, the pronoun is they, third person plural,
Mm-hmm.
and it refers to Israelites.
Good.
And his, another pronoun his, third person singular, and refers to the Lord.
Yep.
And the fourth line, he, third person singular, refers to the Lord and give them third person plural.
Yep.
Uh,
We've already seen
refers
that.
to the Israelites. Yes.
Good.
And verse 8, oh Lord, are, that is first person plural. I'm not sure.
Yes,
Maybe.
that's correct. Because it's not
Okay.
I, it's our. It's not me.
Our. And that means Israelites and the author himself.
Yep. Just like above here, we had an example. Yep. In verse
Yeah.
5, he did the same thing.
Yes. And then God, you. You is second person. I think here, I'm not very sure. Second person singular.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it refers
And
to
yeah,
the
refers
Lord.
to the Lord. Yeah. And then another pronoun is them,
Mm-hmm.
is third person plural,
Yep.
and it refers to the Israelites. And then second line, you.
You again. That's right.
You again, yeah. Second person singular and refers to God. You are forgiven God to them. Them is third person plural, refers to Israelites.
Yep.
And yet of their is third person plural and refers to Israelites.
Good.
Verse 9, verse 9 are, hmm, is it second person plural? I'm not sure.
First, because it's again, he's
Oh,
the speaker's
oh, sorry.
including himself. So no, you're fine.
Yeah, yeah, yes. Sorry. First person plural, yeah. The Israelites and then the speaker himself
Yep.
and worship at his. His third person singular refers to God. Last is our is first person plural. First person plural
Yes.
and refers to Israelites and the author himself.
Good. So again, notice here in this stanza, we have like the third person, right? His, he, they, them. And then look, verse 8. O Lord, our personal, you. O Lord, our God, you answered them. You were forgiving God to them. So there's this he's personalizing it, making it more direct, to, I think he's speaking not only generally, but also directly to God in this. So that's something, again, to pay attention to. Why didn't he just say, "Oh Lord our God," or "the Lord our God"? He answered them. He was a forgiving God. But no, he says, "You answered them. You were forgiving God." And I think here, as I was studying and preaching through this psalm, I took that to be, he shifted the pronoun, I think, because he is amazed that God would show mercy and forgiveness to them and that he would answer them. Right? He says, "We called on you, answered them." Then he repeats it here, right? Notice, right? Samuel called on his name. They called upon the Lord. He answered them. And then verse 8, "O Lord our God, you answered them. You were a forgiving God to them." I think there's emphasis here. I think it's expressing, again, if he were just to say he answered them, he was a forgiving God, that would be true. And then it would be like he's making those statements. This is what happened. But by shifting the pronoun and saying, "You, God, you answered them. You were forgiving God," I think it's expressing like he's like amazed. Like, wow, this is amazing, God, that you would do this. So he wasn't just giving some particular truth. There's also this attitude of awe and thankfulness and amazement in that. So I would see that shifting to the second person pronoun here to express that. The repetition, right? He already said that he answered them. And then in verse 8, he says, "You answered them." So the repetition that he answered, but also that shift in the pronoun. So it might seem like a small little thing, but you want to always remember that the most important Bible study skill, and I mentioned this several times, is always asking, why did the author say that here? All right, so why does he shift the pronoun? Sometimes it's just style, or trying to vary things, but sometimes there is a specific and important reason that he does that. So we're always asking, why did the author say that here? So what is he saying? How does it fit within the flow of the passage? And is there some significance to what the author is doing here and why he made that particular change in this case? All right. So just asking the question. It doesn't always mean that every single word and phrase and clause that there's always something of deep significance. Sometimes there is an important detail that you want to pay attention to. Right? So probably the most famous detail is just one letter. Well, in English, one letter in Matthew 28, right? When Jesus said, baptizing them in the name, singular, of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And that instead of names, plural, he used name, singular. And we've talked about this. Grammatically, he should have said names because he referred to three persons, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. But he used name singular. So even in just that slight difference, there's one of the most significant doctrinal truths in the whole of the Bible, of the Trinity. And just in that one slight difference, we see this profound and deep and significant doctrinal truth. And so sometimes the little details they matter. And other times the details aren't significant or important. And you just have to understand in the flow of the author's thoughts. So here in this psalm, like I said, he's describing the holiness of God And he starts with that God is great and exalted and enthroned, that let all the peoples praise him, right? So this exalted God. And then in the second stanza, the focus is that God is righteous and perfect and just. And then the third stanza, he shifts this holy, awesome, exalted, just, righteous God listens to our prayers, cares for us, forgives. And I think that's why, as you follow the flow of what the author's saying, when you get to verse 8 and he shifts to you answered them, you were forgiving, God. That's why I see significance in that shift, and that he is emphasizing how amazing that God, you would do that. Questions on that? Does that make sense? Thoughts about that? Okay, then we will keep moving. So those are the pronouns. Going through and just listing them out. Oops, wrong one. I'm trying to get back to my. Here we are. Okay, then we want to look at the conjunctions in the passage. And this one, we have a few conjunctions. Chun-Si, let me ask you to take a look. We'll start verses 1 to 3. Do you see any conjunctions there? Remember, we have the two kinds of subordinating and coordinating. Remember probably should pull that up. Let's just see. If you remember, we have the coordinating. That was the and boy, which was and, nor, but, or, and yet. You see any conjunctions here?
Yeah, we have in verse 2, there's an and he is exalted. And also in verse 3, there's another N.
Yeah. And we'll see that all the way through the psalm, and is used quite regularly. I'll just highlight a couple more here. So now we want to do is, so then we ask ourselves, and is and a, if we look at, say, verse 2 there, what kind of conjunction is that? Is it coordinating or subordinating?
Coordinating.
Yeah. From the amboy that I mentioned there. Coordinating, which means it's connecting two grammatically equal statements, words, phrases, or clauses. What is this and in verse 2 connecting? So we want to start with, okay, well, what follows it? Okay, that's what it's connecting. But what's it connect? So it's connecting he is exalted to something else. What's it connecting that statement to?
The Lord is great.
Yes.
And he's exalted. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so the Lord is great and he's exalted. So you would say it's coordinating and it connects. He is exalted. 2, the Lord is great. All right. And the idea is, again, so the Lord is great was an independent clause, and he is exalted, therefore, is also going to be an independent clause. Okay, how about in verse 3? Again, you notice we had an and there. Would also, of course, be coordinating. And what is that connecting there? The and here in verse 3.
It's connecting the adjective of great and awesome together.
Good. Yep. Connects. So it's 2 descriptions of his name. Your great and awesome name. All right. Very good. Let's see. Verses 4 and 5, we again just have and, as I noted. So it's justice and righteousness being connected. Verse 5, exalt the Lord, is being connected to worship. So 2 commands being connected there together. Let's go down. Of course, verse 6, we have an and. Verse 7, an and. We get to verse 9. We see the conjunction for. For holy is the Lord our God. And here, this is subordinating in verse 9. So it's saying what follows, holy is the Lord, is subordinate, is modifying, it's coming under something else. And when we did the diagram, we identified it's coming under exalt and worship. And it's giving the reason. So we put verse 9 for it subordinating, and it's giving the reason to exalt and worship. Okay? And really, those are the only conjunctions listed here. Now, we did, if you remember before, we mentioned that there's an implied conjunction in verse 5 and verse 3. It's stated explicitly in verse 9, for, but in verse 5, we don't have it stated explicitly, but I think the idea is still there. Why do we exalt and worship? Because he is holy. Why should let them praise your great and awesome name? Why? For he is holy. Remember, we discussed that when we were diagramming, that sometimes in poetry, it doesn't include the conjunctions all the time for the sake of brevity. All right, any questions about that? Okay, well let's just cover the last 2 and then we'll be done for this evening. The conditional clauses, remember those are basically conditions, is like if we see an if or an if then statement, right? A condition is, if I am hungry, I will eat dinner. All right, the if here presents a condition for the action. The action, the verb, is I will eat. And notice if we were to do a you chai, I will eat. Give me what are the 3 characteristics of that verb?
I will eat. It will be a future tense. And this will be subjunctive, if I'm not wrong.
Well, he doesn't say I may eat.
Oh, sorry. It will be an aorist, right?
Well, remember the moods are imperative, imperative, indicative.
Indicative. Sorry.
Yeah, it's indicative, right?
Yeah, indicative.
because he's expressing a certainty here. There's no probability. So it's indicative. It's a statement. And then what's the,
it's an
voice?
Active voice.
Yeah. Now notice that action, though, only takes place. There's a condition to the action. That's why it says, if I am hungry, I will eat. All right. He doesn't just say, I will eat dinner. Okay. That would be just a statement. But instead, he says, if I'm hungry. So that's why we call it a conditional clause. It's giving the condition for the action. If you repent, you will be saved. Right? This condition is a significant one, isn't it? What if I just said you will be saved? Well, there's a condition to that. If you repent, you will be saved. So conditional statements are important to notice. And as we look at the psalm, there are not any conditional statements in the psalm. We don't always see them. They aren't always there, but sometimes they are. So you just want to be able to take note of that in this case. And then lastly, excuse me, purpose and result statements. So those are looking in the psalm in particular. Are there any statements that give either the purpose for something or the result of something? And do we see that in this psalm? I'll keep it with you, Yuchai. Do we see any purpose and result statement?
Well, if we assume there is for he is holy, that will be the purpose statement. Let us praise your name, your great and awesome name, because holy is he. And likewise for verse 5 and verse 9 as well.
Yeah. All right, good. And then I think we also, yeah, so good. So those would be we also noticed, remember, the Lord reigns, let the peoples tremble. He's enthroned above, let the earth shake. So that's an expected response.
Yeah.
So maybe
I was thinking, Pastor Tim, is end of verse 6 is also a result. They called upon the Lord and he answered them.
Oh, well, it could be if he had used the conjunction, they called upon the Lord, so he answered them. I would say that, but because he uses and, he's making two declarations. But yeah, I think that's a good insight, or observation that he did respond to them calling upon him. But he still used and actually, you know what? In Hebrew, the conjunction there, that's a good point. The conjunction in the Hebrew text is usually, it's just the same, but it can sometimes mean, so what was that verse? 6? Yeah.
Yep.
Called upon, so here's called upon Yahweh, and he himself answered. So there's an emphasis as well. So I don't know if you can see that this one little
like an aleph.
No, it's this letter here. It's called a wow. It's often translated and. That's the most common. So here's so this is he called, or sorry, they called upon Yahweh. Here's Yahweh. And then, and that's that one. And then this here is he. But then also we have the verb answered. He answered. It's hard to spell with my mouse here. Okay.
You did very well.
So there's an emphasis. He answered. So there's, but that, so this wow here, this is often translated as and, but it also can be translated as or so, or therefore even at times. So in Greek, there's different conjunctions used. So there'll be specific Greek words that will reflect either, like in English, you have the word and coordinating, and then you may have so that, or therefore, or for. And in Greek, it's like that. There's different words. But in Hebrew, that same wow there are different words for therefore and so that, but also sometimes the wow can function that way. I think here it's not necessarily doing that. I don't think it's a result statement. I think it's because of the emphatic he himself. I think he's making two parallel statements. They called and he himself answered. Because they basically added that pronoun that wasn't necessary to add in the text because it's already embedded in the verb. When it's the verb he answered is he answered. That's the form of the verb. So by adding the pronoun again, that's a way that sometimes they'll emphasize in the Hebrew. In English, we would say, he answered them. And then if I wanted to make emphasis, he himself answered them. And that's what's going on here.
Pastor Tim, I just noticed that the version that we were using in the exercise just now was an ESV, that they called upon him and he answered them.
New American Standard.
All right, because because I noticed the LSB translated as they would call upon Yahweh and he would answer them.
Yeah.
And so just to understand what is the point that, or rather the interpretive approach that LSB translator take by translating as they would call upon him, he would answer them, as compared to, is it emphasizing that that is what the true heroes of faith in the history of Israel, Moses, Aaron, and Samuel, that's what they did. They would call upon Yahweh and he would answer them, so that the audience of the Psalm 99 will be encouraged to follow the footsteps or the example of Moses, Aaron, and Samuel? Or was he just stating a historical fact in the past?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why did they do that? I don't think that's more of just their opinion. There's no, the verb is just generically
they call upon, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just generically okay. Yeah, that's in the form of a participle.
Oh, okay.
But so this is the participle. We're calling. They were calling. But the other one, he answered, is not a participle. It's just an imperfect. Yeah, they're picking up on some subtleties in the Hebrew there. That's an interpretive option. Like this is what they would normally do. This was sort of an ongoing activity. Wasn't a one-time thing. They were calling. And then he made it a habit or characteristic of answering. I think that's what that's why they put the would there. But that's something I think because that's an interpretive thing, I think that's something I would have probably just left it as I might have put they were calling on the Lord and he answered them in the translation, but that's something that I think as it is interpretive, so translators need to be careful they don't go too far. I think that's probably a reasonable interpretation of that, and this is where the translators run into the challenge. This is so difficult in their translation.
Yeah.
There's a distinction between translation and interpretation. Translation is an interpretation, but to a certain point. But then if you add in, so here, like the subtleties, you might think, well, it could be, one of two things. And so rather than leave it a little bit vague, the translators went ahead and gave their opinion in the translation. Very hard to know how to do that. And that's where we get into the whole discussion of the literal versus dynamic translations, where how much do you just translate the word, give this the definition, versus the sense. Remember, in language, right, when there's a statement made, you have the literal statement and you have the sense. You have the lexical, the definitions of the words, and then you have the syntactical. How are those words being put together? And what does it mean? And so with words, and in certain words put together in a certain way, can have a connotation of and express an idea. Like I could say I am hungry, or I could say I am starving. Right? There's similar, starving and hunger, but there's a distinction, right? Starving is a much stronger statement of hunger. And so even just a slight difference in the word can have a larger impact on but if I were to say I am very hungry, what's the difference between that and saying I'm starving? Is there a subtlety? Why didn't I use the word starving? Why did I say very hungry? And so translators get caught in this, how much, what is the author, what's the syntactic, what's the syntax, or what's the semantic? What's the semantic idea? What's the putting these words together? What does he mean? Versus just giving a strict dictionary definition. I don't know if I'm making sense, but so you have on one side like the New American Standard or the LSB or the ESV, which tend to be much more literal. And then you have like the NIV, which is more dynamic, that gives more of an interpretation. And then you have like very interpretive, like the Living Bible or the Message, which is just a paraphrase. That's extremely interpretive. It's not a good translation. All right. So, so you've got that whole range to consider. So I like to go with the more literal as possible, and then do study to determine what it means. But then again, if somebody who's not a scholar, not a pastor or an exegete, and they're just reading the Bible, they need to have, if you just give a strict literal definition, literal translation, a lot of it they're not going to understand. So you do need to give some of the syntax, semantics, some of the interpretive elements, so someone reading it can understand. And so how far do you go with that? That's a big challenge. You guys know that, and speaking in different languages, like there's a challenge there. How do I represent these words the most accurately in another language? And so I really have a high degree of respect for and appreciation for translators. They have a difficult task of conveying the meaning, but not being overly interpretive. And where's that line of overly interpretive? It's a challenge. So here in this text, the LSB translators felt like because of the use of the participle there with the imperfect verbs, that there is more of a sense of an ongoing nature of this calling and answering. Whenever they would call, he would answer, as opposed to just they called and he answered. Is that like one time they called? Or is it many, so there's some ambiguity there, but by saying they would call and he would answer indicates sort of more of an ongoing activity. And I think that is probably a bit, is a more precise translation here, but it is a little bit interpretive. For what that's worth. Translation's a difficult, and that's what we're doing when we're studying a text and then explaining it in a sense, right? We're interpreting it. And so this is why we have to take all of these steps and considerations going through the process so that we are as accurate and careful as we can be to rightly represent the intended meaning of the Spirit and the human author together in that passage. All right. Well, we've come to a close for this evening. Again, as I mentioned, I'll be a few weeks off here as I'll be traveling. But when we gather back together, we'll look at word studies together. I think that's an important element in Bible study. I think one that's often misunderstood in the role and place for word studies. I think some people elevate them too highly. Others minimize the importance. So we want to talk about what is the purpose of word study, what are some things to consider, some cautions, but also some ways that word studies help, and then like a practical, how do we do a word study? We'll talk about those things, Lord willing, next time that we gather. Okay? Any final thoughts or questions before we close and take a little bit of a break here the next few weeks?
Yeah, well, I would like you to have prayed for me. I'm going back, and I'm going to be in a lot of people thinking I've become a Calvinist, and so I guess they're Arminian. That's why they think that. But then there's the King James only people, and that's a can of worms. There's going to be a lot of them, and so there's just a